recently switched up the type of soap that I use in an effort to be more environmentally friendly, cruelty-free, healthier, all that fun stuff. Just to be more aware of what I'm putting into my body and what type of products that I'm using and putting into the atmosphere. But since I switched up my soap, I noticed that I have to clean my shower a lot more often now too. So does that mean I'm dirtier or cleaner now? Hey everyone, this is Colette with Kicking It with Colette. And in this episode, I want to talk a little bit about a new hobby that I started in 2020. A new hobby in addition to podcasting because, obviously this is a new thing too. But my other new hobby is gardening. Now, I never thought I'd become a gardener, but here I am. 2020 has been pretty wild, and I think we've all done things that we never thought we'd do out of necessity. And a lot of other people, I believe, have started gardening also in 2020 because gardening videos and sorts of things are becoming more popular. And I think it's because we're all starting to consider our food source. When distribution was disrupted with the coronavirus and then there was outbreaks at meat packing plants, people started thinking, hey, maybe I need to have my own source of food. And that is so true. And that was part of my motivation also. But another thing that actually inspired me to start a garden was Netflix. Yeah. So I was watching the Netflix special Down to Earth, the one hosted by Zac Efron. And it's about him traveling around the world, looking at sustainability in different countries and climate change and all that sort of thing, and looking at how different countries are making a difference. And it's really interesting, and I found it to be quite inspiring. I saw how other countries were approaching things, and my first thought was, that's really great, but man, America ain't gonna do that. America, we're too selfish, we're too individualistic to do something for the better of the country. But then I flipped it and said, I can't change America, but I can change my own habits. So what am I doing to be more sustainable? So I started gardening, but I also started recycling. Now, I grew up recycling, but when I moved to the city I live in now, I stopped because recycling wasn't convenient. And now that I think about it, that was a terrible excuse not to recycle. It's not convenient. There's not a recycling box outside of my home and nobody's going to pick it up for me, so I'm not going to do it. And that was a terrible excuse. So I decided, Colette, it's time to do better. We're going to start recycling. So I found recycling drop-off locations and, started doing the do. Got my little milk crate out in the garage where I keep my recyclables, and once a week I drive it over, dump it in the recycle bin. And actually they do make it easy because you don't even have to sort everything. You just throw it all in one bin. The only thing that's sorted is glass. So cool. So I started doing that in 2020. But back to gardening. So last year in 2019, I actually became a vegetarian. Well, mostly vegetarian, aside from bacon and chicken wings, an occasional shrimp, and fish every now and then. But I'm on a plant-based diet, okay? I'm really not into labels anyway, but pretty much on a plant-based diet. I eat chicken or seafood or fish occasionally. And when I say occasionally, it's really once a month, if that. So when there was outbreaks at meatpacking plants, that really wasn't a problem for me. I was like, whew, it's a good time to eat vegetables. So all of my grocery shopping basically takes place in the produce aisle, which also made it much easier to start a garden. I really started thinking, if I grew most of this stuff, I wouldn't need to go to the store for much of anything except for hummus. So I started a garden. And I never thought I'd get into gardening because I've never been a fan of plants. Plants are cool, but flowers, not really my thing. I just didn't see the purpose. So they're so pretty to look at. Yeah, no, that's not good enough for me. TVs are good to look at too. Doesn't mean I'm going to start manufacturing them. My mom, she's really into plants. She likes beautiful flowers and stuff. And she would always tell me, oh, Colette, you need a plant by your front door. No, I don't. You're lucky to have this welcome mat, okay? We don't need plants too. To me, flowers are just useless. You look at them like, for what? And then you see people gardening and they're spending all this time, money, and energy digging in the dirt and whatever just to look at something. Come on. I just don't get it. Even roses. Roses, okay, they're pretty, but they also have thorns. Like, roses are very needy. If you like, they have all kinds of thorns on them. You gotta prune them. They're just all fussy, and you gotta spray them. Make sure there's no bugs, and then you prune all the other roses to make sure that one bud has a beautiful bloom. And that's just too much. Not my ministry. But this gardening thing, I could get into, because for me, gardening is more like growing vegetables. It's like a quid pro quo. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. I feed you water, you feed me belly. Like, I'm all about a garden with the ROI. If there's a return on my investment, like delicious food, then yes, I'm totally into it. So yeah, I've started gardening. I have a small backyard, so I'm doing the container gardening thing, and I have like these felt bags, which I got off Amazon. Before I even know it was a thing, I thought it was just a good deal. And then I started watching gardening videos and reading books, and they're talking about how great felt bags are for containers. So I was like, boom, for the win. And I bought them because they were cheap. So yeah, accidental win there, but I'll take it. So I got my little garden growing in the backyard. Right now, I have sage, sweet potatoes, kale, some lettuce, chard, carrots. I feel like I'm missing something. Oh, cucumbers and tomatoes. And most of these I've grown from seed, but some of them had to get transplants for, because I am new to this, but I'll get back to that in a minute. I'll talk about it right now. So when I started this garden, a lot of people said, oh man, it's too late. It's too late to be planting seeds. Because I had a hard time finding seeds. I'd go to the stores and they didn't have seeds. And I was like, what do you mean you don't have seeds? You're a gardening store on your website. You said all your garden needs. And I need seeds and you don't have them. So that was rude. Like, I ventured all the way to the store. First of all, since this Rona has been happening, I don't go to the store. I've been ordering my groceries curbside, and then I go pick them up. So for me to brave the automatic doors of an actual brick and mortar establishment, that was a big deal. And then for you not to have what I wanted, like, that was rude. Low-key disrespectful, but, I'm a forgive, because that's what Jesus wants me to do. So I did. Anywho, so I go on Amazon. I didn't want to buy seeds off Amazon, especially since we're having this weird thing with seeds miraculously showing up in the mail from China. And I didn't want to be a part of that scheme. But I had to resort to Amazon anyway, simply out of necessity. So I got some seeds and put them in the ground. And people were telling me, oh, it's too late for seed, blah, blah, blah. But I wanted to try, and I wanted to see anyway. If it doesn't work, I will keep ordering my groceries from Kroger. Like, it's no big deal. But at least I'll have something. And I was talking to my best friend about it. And she said, go ahead and plant your seeds. You never know what will come up. And I was like, ooh, that was a word. Like, I don't know if you meant it that way, but that was a word. And if you think about it biblically, like I said, I'm a Christian, so I do kind of think in terms of scripture, spiritual, whatever. Not to like hyper spiritualize or over spiritualize a lot of things, but it is a big part of my life, and it kind of is a governing system of my life. So that is how I think of things. And I thought about the verse in Ecclesiastes, and it says, if you always consider the clouds, you'll never plant. And basically, you plant your seed in the morning and you do your thing in the evening, and you never know which one will be prosperous. So I went ahead and planted my seeds. And one thing that I have learned is that with planting seeds, planting a garden, whatever you do, even if it doesn't seem like the quote unquote right timing. No, trust me, there is a good timing for everything. But there's always a good time to learn. Learning is always in season. So whether I get a nice harvest or not, I'm learning. I'm learning how to plant container beds. I'm learning how to set up my garden. I'm learning where the shade is in my garden. Those sorts of things. I'm learning where to buy seeds from. I learned the difference between heirloom seeds and just regular seeds. Before, I only heard the term heirloom as it pertained to tomatoes, so I thought it was a variety. But really, heirloom could be any vegetable. And it really just means that the seeds are non-GMO and they're like saved from the previous harvest and that kind of thing. So heirloom is the way to go. Apparently that's how all the like profesh gardeners do it. They're all about the heirloom movement. So I'm like, yay, count me in. Heirloom movement. That's me. Me and my garden with 4 containers, but I'm working my way up. You got to start somewhere, right? So yeah, I started gardening, and my first set of seeds they didn't come up, to be honest. Well, I take that back. They did break the surface, but that was about it. They didn't grow any bigger. Like, I have rainbow shard is one of the things that I planted, and I was really excited about it because of the colors. Like, how do you not be excited about a vegetable that has rainbow in the name? Like, that is always a good idea. So, yeah, if you don't know, rainbow shard is a leafy green, like spinach or collards or something like that, but the stems are colorful. So you have like a bright pink, or you could have white, or you could have yellow, or you could have like a deep red. So that's one of the things that I was so excited about in my garden. And also, rainbow shard is a cold hardy plant, so it can take a frost. And I was like, all right, bet, since I'm actually starting this garden late, it was late August, mid to late August at the time, that something cold hardy is perfect. So when we go into November, when the frost hits or whatever, I need to make sure that I have something that's gonna maintain it, because what I'm not about to do is be out there putting a blanket on my plants. Well, I say that now, but you know what? I'm probably lying. I probably will, because this gardening thing is actually turning out to be pretty fun. So yeah, anywho, my plants, they broke the surface, but they didn't grow big and leafy and strong and whatnot. They just was like a teeny little sprig and like 2 little leaves. And that was it. And I think maybe I planted them too soon, because I'm in Georgia and it was still pretty hot. Like, I'm not in Hotlanta, but I'm pretty close. And so it was still pretty hot, and I think it was just too hot for my little seedlings. And yes, everyone's like, oh, you should have, grow them inside and then transplant them. Tried that too. I also learned that in order for that to be successful, you need to grow light. Like, there's just not enough light inside my home. I tried to set them beside a window, but it just wasn't enough. They came up, broke the surface, but they were leggy, as gardening term. They were leggy, meaning they were just all stems, and no, the stems were weak and they weren't growing into a nice sturdy plant. But and the moral of the story is, I learned something, and I would not have learned anything had I not tried. So yeah, learning is always in season. If you're thinking about doing something and you think it's not the right time, just remember that learning is always in season. And it also takes the pressure off of yourself. If you don't have the pressure to produce, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to see what happens and I'm going to learn for it, then just rock with it. It's like there's no L's, only lessons. If I ever took an L, I learned a lesson. I will never think I'm better than a blessing. If the blessings gonna work. Do y'all know that song? Trey Songs. Ooh, that was way wrong. Lecrae and Ty Dolla $ign. Blessings. It's one of my favorite songs. It's on Lecrae's album All Things Work. That is an awesome album. When that album came out, I was going through things myself, and 828 got me out of bed in the morning. The song 828, it's gonna all work out sooner or later. Yeah, that song that got me out of bed in the mornings. So shout out to Lecrae and Ty Dolla $ign. Maybe one day you will be listening to my podcast, and that would be awesome. We can totally do like, okay, maybe not. I was gonna say a collabo, but you probably don't want to collabo with me. But I would still think it's awesome. You never know. We'll put it out there in the atmosphere. And another thing I learned with my garden is, don't be afraid to start over. Since my other seeds didn't quite make it this past weekend, the weather had cooled down a bit. So I decided I'm going to try again. I also had watched a few more gardening videos. Thank you to YouTube University. I'm earning lots of credits in my minor of gardening. So I learned a few other things, a few mistakes that I had made with my planting before. So I went back, corrected those mistakes. I realized that my lettuce didn't crumb up. 1, it was too hot. 2, I had buried it too deep. Lettuce seeds, you just kind of sprinkle on the surface. And I learned that. So I'll replant it this weekend. And I just checked my garden when I went outside. a few minutes ago, and my lettuce seeds are actually breaking the surface now, which they didn't do before. So yay, it's a win. So yeah, I'm excited about that. So yo, start a garden if you haven't, and it's never too late. It's never too late to learn. And there's all different methods of gardening too. There's urban gardening, which I got a book about urban gardening by Kevin Espiritu, and it just has different methods for gardening. You know, you can do containers like I'm doing. I'm also doing a vertical garden where I take a shoe rack, you know, like shoe rack that you hang on the back of your door that has like the pockets and everything. I got one of those, and I've planted in that also. That's where my lettuce and spinach and half of my kale is in there. I plan on putting some arugula in there also, and maybe some basil. And so a hanging garden is another option. And I've got it, instead of hanging on the back of a door, it's hanging on the back of my fence. I have like a privacy fence. And yo, I'm really excited about it. So, and I never thought I'd be excited about plants. So if you want to do some gardening, give it out a try. But since I've been more into plants lately, I've been like going on walks. Well, one, just to get out and breathe some fresh air and get some vitamin D and to be somewhere without a mask on. So I go on walks around the neighborhood. I take what I call my non-smoker breaks at work. You know how smokers like step outside, take a cigarette. Well, I just step outside and I just stand there. No cigarette. I just stand there. Sometimes you just need to step outside. But as I'm outside, I'm looking at the plants around me. I'm looking at the trees. I'm looking at the bushes. And one thing I thought about is, you know, and I'm watching the landscaping guys, and I'm like, how useless are all this landscaping? I'm sure we're paying this company, this contractor, thousands of dollars a year to do the landscaping on campus, and we can't eat none of this. Like, what? If you think about it, it's kind of crazy. Like, we could have had food. Like, we could be growing food all over the place. And I'm thinking this as I'm looking on campus, and I thought this was I was walking around my neighborhood and seeing trees that have been deliberately planted for landscaping purposes. And I think, why not? If you're going to put a tree there, why not put a fruit tree? And then I had a thought almost immediately, because fruit is messy. Fruit is messy. And I mean that physically and in the spiritual. Because if there was fruit in this tree by the neighborhood or on campus, the tree is going to produce fruit. And if nobody picks it, the fruit's going to fall. It's going to be on the ground. It's going to rot. People are going to drive through it. People are going to walk through it. It's going to get messy. Animals are going to come. And it can end up being a gross situation if no one's, paying attention to it. But also in your life, fruit is messy. There's another verse in Proverbs when it talks about a barn, and like the barn stays clean if you don't have an ox, but you need an ox in order to till the land and actually produce something. So in order to produce something in your life, it's gonna get messy. So all you moms out there worrying about having a clean house, there's your out right there. Fruit is messy. So if ever somebody's like, your house is so messy, you're like, I'm trying to produce something in my children. I ain't worrying about this house. So there's your out right there. You trying to produce some fruit in your kids. And that's why there's Cheerios on the floor and in between the couch cushions. You growing fruit. Just lets people know you are growing fruit. So, yeah. And I thought, but if we put fruit trees and if we had vegetation everywhere, then people that were homeless, we'd probably actually eliminate homelessness. Because think about how much money you spend on food. If you didn't have to worry about food, if you can walk down the street, take a walk around the block and collect dinner for free, you're saving money on food, children, another sad thing that was revealed because of COVID is how many kids actually depend on going to school to even eat. That's so sad. And so when schools shut down, they had to continue their lunch programs because kids had to eat. Now, if we were growing food and all these random trees outside of neighborhoods, outside of shopping malls or wherever they're at, in all this landscaping, if we were growing fruit trees and vegetables and these bushes and everything, then we wouldn't have that issue with the school lunches. Kids could just run outside, snap you off a banana or a mango or pull up some kohlrabi. I don't know. I just like to say kohlrabi. I know there's no kids eating kohlrabi, but there'd be food right there, and hunger wouldn't be an issue, and that would be so amazing. And then I thought, man, it would just be so amazing if everything that grew was good for food. And then it dawned on me. I've heard that before. Everything that grew was good for food. Why do I know that? Genesis. It's from Genesis. The garden. God's original plan in the garden. All the food was good. All the trees and vegetation, everything that grew was good for food. It's just after the fall, the fall of man, after, we sin, after Adam and Eve sinned and ate the fruit, the one fruit tree that we're not supposed to eat from. Oh, the ground was cursed after that. And that's why we have thorns and thistles and rose bushes with thorns on them and delicious blackberries but growing brambles, and that's why we have to till the ground. Yes, we have to amend soil and all that kind of thing. It's because of fall of man. It's our fault. It's our fault why everything we see isn't good for food. And that was God's original intention. So world hunger was never supposed to be a thing. It would have never been a thing had we not eaten from one tree. We could have had access to every single tree, all of the trees. Actually, Adam and Eve had access to all the trees. There were zero restrictions except one. And that's crazy how the enemy will get you so hyper-focused on the one thing that you do not have that it screws up everything that you do have. Oh man, that's a word for COVID-19 also. We focus on the one thing we can't do. And we get hyper-focused on one thing that we can't do. Oh, I can't go to this restaurant. And you just ruin and just screws up your whole day, your whole life. Everything is just jacked up because you can't go to that one restaurant. Or because you can't go to an NBA game. I know it sucks. It sucks. But if you don't get hyper-focused on what you don't have and pay attention to what you do have, think about all the blessings that we still have. Oh, blessings if I ever took it, learn a lesson. That's gonna be the theme song for this episode. Blessings. Count 'em up, count 'em up, count 'em up. Work. Yeah. I really like that song. Yo, for real, go check out the album Lecrae, All Things Work. But yeah, so don't get hyper-focused on the things that you don't have and end up screwing up the things you do have. And not just screwing it up for you, screwing it up for everybody. Your family, the next generations, and your children, and their children, and their children. Another great song. So, yeah, just focus on what you do have. What was I saying? Yeah, fruit is messy. Yeah, fruit is messy. But it's also worth it. It's messy, but it's worth it. Back to a spiritual sense, when you get involved, like getting involved in someone else's life, like discipleship, bro, that's a messy thing. I low-key attempted some discipleship before, and yeah, that was messy. I don't even want to go into it because it was uber messy. But yeah, it it's worth it. I don't have any regrets though, because no L's, only lessons. I learned some lessons, I still pray for that person when I think of her. But anywho, fruit is messy, but it's worth it. It's worth it to produce something, and that's what God intended. Hear people say you don't have a testimony without a test, and you don't have a message without a mess. So there you go. Now you can live this beautifully manicured life, looking like #relationship goals, have your Instagram popping, but you can have with that beautiful manicured life and like beautiful manicured trees with flowers on them, and it's all beautiful. They're useless. They're just completely useless. Your life will be useless if you don't produce anything. So get messy and produce something. If you know anything about entrepreneurship, messy. Boy, that's messy. But, everybody likes to praise an entrepreneur. It's like, oh, they do. I'm self-made and did all that. Yeah, but it's messy, though. It is messy. So if you want to actually produce something in life, prepare for the mess. But it's worth it. It's also worth it because fruit is delicious and it is sweet. So once that mess, once it matures, it's delicious and sweet. That's awesome. But speaking of messy, And speaking of gardening, another thing that I learned and that I'm also working on, I'm in the process. It's in process. It's brewing. It's cooking right now. Composting. Ooh, dirty word, literally. So most people think of composting, at least me, I did. When I first thought of composting, I thought of like old, dirty, molded, rotten fruit and food, and it was just stinky. And actually, we're gonna tie this into the fruit is messy. But if you take that messy, rotten fruit, and you add some stuff to it, you add in some dead leaves and some old dirt and some grass clippings, and you let a thing marinate, you'll have really awesome compost. Like, composting is so cool because you take the scraps, you take the stuff that you couldn't eat, like your food scraps from your kitchen, the fruit has gone rotten, the grass clippings from cutting your lawn, the branches and leaves from pruning your trees, all the stuff that you would have gotten rid of, and you put it all together and you let it sit over time. You maybe want to agitate it or whatever, and that trash, that rubbish, becomes awesome food for your garden. It's like it becomes really great nourishment and natural fertilizer from your garden. And like, composting is the same as like taking L's. Like, if you think about all the losses you had, you take all your L's and you gather them up, and you take it over some time and you let it marinate, and then you take them lessons and you put it back into your garden of whatever you're trying to produce. It'll be nourishment for it. What? Like, how amazing is that? Wow. Like, to me, that's awesome, and that's crazy. And that's, I'm sure, God's original intent. Like, I'm thinking, wow, God, did you do that on purpose? And he's like, yeah, duh. But yeah, like, that's amazing. Like, composting. And yeah, it takes some time, and people are like, but compost, it stinks. It really doesn't if you do it right. And that's another thing. Some things that we do, it stinks because we're doing it wrong. So I learned with composting, more practical, you got a mixture of browns and greens. Okay, browns are like dead leaves, paper, cardboard, stuff like that, and your greens are like grass clippings, food scraps. Greens are like nitrogen rich, browns are carbon rich, and you want to have a mixture of both of them in order to have a successful compost. And now if your compost is stinky, I learned that you just got to add some more brown stuff or add some more dry material to like let it balance out. But it can be fixed, and you just want to check on it every couple days. And another thing to keep your compost from being stinky, and I learned this from all of my hours of YouTube and watching gardening videos, like, I have like the YouTube equivalent of master's degree in gardening because I've put in that many YouTube hours. So anywho, I learned that if you have too much of the green stuff, you add more browns, and then it's not stinky anymore. Oh, I've already said that. Okay, where was I going with this? Yes, exposure. Another thing, key ingredient to composting is oxygen. So when you've got to aerate it, you've got to turn it over, you got to mix it up, and you got to keep adding oxygen to it. So they're like microbes. Some microbes feed off bacteria and they need oxygen, and then it's the stinky microbes that don't need oxygen. So when the oxygen runs out, the good microbes die, and then the bad stinky microbes come in, and so you want to keep oxygen in it. And I just thought about it, to keep the stinky, messy, to keep the stink out of your mess of life, is adding oxygen to it. Exposure. Like a good old Southern term, and they say, tell the truth, shame the devil. Bruh, like, that works for composting too. Like, expose that thing to the truth, expose that thing to the oxygen, and shame the devil, and keep it from being stinky. Like, how cool is that? And I also think about, like, man, like, the Bible, when the Bible was written, it was like an agricultural time, right? People were growing their own food, and there was a market. Like, there was no Kroger. So a lot of these concepts made more sense to them because it paralleled their everyday life. And it's like, man, how much of that has been lost since that's a huge part of life that we don't do anymore. Like on a large scale, if you need food is instant. You go to the store, you pick it up, you eat it right then. Or now you don't even have to go to the store. You want food, you click a button, somebody brings it to you. So a lot of the concepts and gardening tips and practices and principles have been lost with our modern society. And maybe it's a good thing. Like, that's a low-key blessing in Corona. We're getting back to some things that we probably should have been doing before. We're spending more time with our families than we are before. I'm actually, me, and I'm sure other people, you're actually getting outside more, because when you have to wear a mask inside, it kind of sucks. So it forces you to go outside, get you some good old vitamin D, some fresh air. The air may not be so fresh depending on where you live, but you can try. You can just get some vitamin D and, exercise, your sunglasses, whatever. But yeah, get outside, get some air, get some sun. And yeah, it's changing our way of life, but hey, it may actually low key be for the better. When the Israelites were going through the wilderness, it sucked at the time, but ultimately the life is being changed for the better. So maybe we're just in the wilderness right now, and just keep being optimistic and look for that better. But another thing that I learned listening to YouTube University, another thing I also listen to are like messages, sermons, that kind of thing. I'm a little bit of a nerd, but that's what I listen to, and I like it because it's important what you feed yourself. And I try to make sure that I'm feeding myself things that are good and profitable for my soul, because if not, I would have lost hope had I not believed I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. That Psalm, was that 27? Yeah. So that's why I try to keep myself feeded with faith. And I was listening to a message by Dr. Anita Phillips. And man, wow. Like, sis, to me, Dr. Anita Phillips is like hashtags goals. She's amazing. She's brilliant. She's a therapist and a pastor. Man, she also has a podcast, In the Light. So check her out. And man, she drops some truth bombs like crazy. And she's so intelligent. And I love intelligent people. Like, if you can teach me something and then it's like biblical and scientific, woo, you have got a listener for life. So yeah, Dr. Anita Phillips. And she's got this amazing sermon called Good Ground. And she preached it at the Potter's House, T.D. Jakes Church in Texas. And man, and in the beginning of her sermon, like the whole premise of it is, well, you've got to understand this one foundational premise. And then she explains everything else. And that foundational thing is that we humans are plants. Yes, we are plants. We are generations. We are the last generation of plant life. Just think about it. Like, God created the heavens and earth, and he separated the sea and the water, and then he created, plants or whatever, and then he created humans. And if you think about us, in order to stay healthy, what do we need? Sunlight, water, not Netflix, but sunlight and water and other things that plants need. Plants also grow healthier if you talk to them. People grow to be healthier if you talk to them. And so we are descendants of plants. And I thought that was like a really amazing thing. And it also has shaped how I do my gardening, and things that are healthy for my gardening are healthy for me. And also there's another guy that I like to listen to, and his name is Tim Mackey. He's one of the creators of the Bible Project. And he's funny and quirky, and I think he's adorable. And he's just really, he's really funny. And he's also a Bible teacher, Bible scholar. So he can really drill down, into the Bible, into scripture, and also using different context, not context, but in a different way, he also comes to the conclusion that, we are plants. And I remember Tim's message when he talks about that. I should have looked up the name of the video, but he talks about Bible and politics and that kind of thing. And I recently shared it on my Facebook page. But he also talks about the beginning, in the beginning with Genesis, and purports that we are literally earthlings. We came from the earth and we will go back to the earth. So therefore we're earthlings, just like plants. But yeah, so I thought, man, that's interesting that we are descendants of plants. And you know me, I like to. I'm a little weird. Maybe you don't know me, but that's okay. You're gonna get to know me over these seasons. Seasons, plants. There it is again. But I was had a thought. It's like, okay, we're plants. We're descendants of plants. Does that mean that vegetarians are actually cannibals? What? I know that's silly, but hey, it's just I'm just putting it out there. Whatever, do whatever you want with it. But you'll think differently next time you stab that fork into a salad. Anyway, but yeah, we're descendants of plants. And going back to Dr. Nina Phillips talking about good ground, and she's talking about the good ground of like your mind and your emotional space, us being descendants of plants. And another thing that I've noticed as I walked around and, fruit is messy and looking at all of the lost opportunities that we could have been planting food and feeding our world and the community, I also noticed that something odd on the trees here in Georgia where I live. And I noticed it first on one of the trees in my front yard that is starting to get a disease. It's got like a fungus on it. And the fungus is like spreading and it's actually damaging the bark of the tree. And it's making my tree sick. The leaves are fine so far, but that I see the disease is like spreading. And as I look around, I see there's that same like fungus on other trees and on other bushes. Not just in my neighborhood. As I walk around the neighborhood, I see it and I see the evidence of it on almost all the trees. When I'm walking around on campus, I see it again. And it's something I would have never paid attention to before had I not noticed it in the beginning stages on another tree and then seen the progression on others. And it made me think of another thing. This disease is common, but just because it's common and just because it's normal on all the trees doesn't mean it's healthy. And man, you can that applies to scrolling through your news feed. We see things and just because they're normal and just because they're common and people and in our emotional space, how we handle situations, things that we post and things that we say, things that we do, how we spend our time, just because it's normal and just because it's common doesn't mean it's healthy. And I think 2020 is another opportunity to sit back and notice those things and take care of those things and notice those diseased areas. Now, I don't know what to do about my tree. I haven't crossed that course in YouTube yet, but it's really made me take inventory of myself and what I'm doing in my own emotional health, in my mental space. And it's just because everything is, and not letting people and things around me be the judge of how healthy I am. You've got to go back to the beginning. In order to figure out what's really going on with my tree to make it healthy, I need to find an expert. I need to find someone who knows what this disease is, can identify it, knows what it looks like from the beginning, and knows how to, eradicate it. And so I'm going to need some help with that. And, with my own life and mental health and space and stuff, it's just because it's normal and common to me doesn't mean it's actually healthy. So maybe I should look into some of these habits that I have. Maybe I should look into some of these processes that I have and see if they're actually diseases that I've just gotten used to. So that's something else that I've been doing in 2020 also. And I would encourage you to do it too, because 2020 has been traumatic for us all, especially if you're like me, if you're African American and Christian and going to a mixed race church. 2020, it was a bit traumatic. It was a bit traumatic. So recognizing that in myself has actually motivated me to, seek some help, seek some counsel about that. And I would encourage you to do it also. Don't just look at the trees around you and accept the disease. In a forest full of disease, common trees, you can be the healthy tree producing fruit. Well, that's it for this episode. Hopefully, you were inspired and enlightened, and at the very least, entertained.